Hi there! Welcome back to our introduction to the landscape and language of food safety. So previously we've gone over all the different things that go into food safety regulation, who regulates what, given some different examples, and started talking about how we regulate food here in America, and that is we do hazards-based food safety regulation. But what does that actually mean when we say hazards-based food safety regulation? Well, it means that when we write food safety plans, we do it one of two ways. We either write preventive controls plans if we're FDA regulated, or we write HACCP plans. Either way, the general steps are pretty much the same. If you talk to our friends over at the FDA, they're going to say that writing a preventive controls plan is nothing like writing a HACCP. It is almost entirely like writing a HACCP, okay? I know the people who were sitting in the meetings, and yeah, it's like writing a HACCP, and there we have it. So, however you want to approach it, either this problem or other problems that you're going to solve, there are some really basic general steps that I'm going to walk you through on how we do HACCP planning or failure mode effect analysis, like I talked in the last one. And how we do that in food, okay? We're talking with a food-specific example, but this can be extrapolated to an awful lot of different processes, all right? And so as you go through this, think about that for whatever road you're going down as you go into the food business or an allied profession in the food business or even something completely different, So think about this because it's a good set of steps. All right, so HACCP itself has 7 steps, but there are 5 pre-steps of HACCP, and so I call HACCP a 12-step program. So here are the 12 steps of HACCP, all right? So the first thing in any, and I'm going to make this kind of general, but anytime you want to solve a problem, anytime you want to approach something and do it better, form a team. All right, form a team of people who know what they're doing. There you go, step 1. Then know what you're making. So in food, we call it describing your food. What are you making? What goes into it? What are the ingredients? All right, so I've talked about that a fair amount, but it's really important to understand what you're making, okay? Then you have to describe how your consumer is gonna eat your food, okay? And just because you think your consumer is supposed to use your food one way, doesn't mean they're going to use your food one way, okay? We have this problem in technology all the time. The programmers do the user acceptance testing, and they think that the users are going to use the program the same way that they do. Users, whether they're using apps or they're using cars or they're using food and consuming it, do it the way that they want to, and you need to keep that in mind. There's no other way to put that. So you have to design with the end user in mind. And the most famous case about this is back in the early 90s, Nestle came out with chocolate chip cookie dough in a tube. And what did everybody do? They went and they bought pre-made chocolate chip cookie dough, and this was before Netflix. So they got a video from the video store, and they popped it in the VCR, and they ate their chocolate chip cookie dough with a spoon, okay? And they got sick. That chocolate chip cookie dough had salmonella in it because it had unpasteurized eggs. And there was a lawsuit, and Nestle lost. And Nestle said, but it's dough, it's supposed to be cooked. And the judge disagreed, and the judge said, you should have known that people eat chocolate chip cookie dough raw. And so this is illustrative for 2 reasons. First, you have to manufacture your food with the end user in mind. And second, you have to this gives us an appreciation of how industrialized food came to be. It's because we sue. When people get sick from their food, they sue. And so Nestle stopped using real eggs, and they started using pasteurized egg product. And that's how we get industrialized food. Okay, so That's describing your food and your consumer who consumes it, all right? And then the next thing that you have to do is you have to describe how you make it, okay? Know what you make, know how you make it, all right? This is true of whether you're making cars, airplanes, or your Snickers bars, all right? So when we talk about process flow diagramming, all process flow diagrams have the same following characteristics. You receive food, raw materials, you store those raw materials, you process those raw materials, you package and label those raw materials, you store them as finished product storage, and then you distribute them and you get them out of here. That's it. All food processes can be described in those 5 steps. The processing part is generally more complex than just process, okay? But that's the general idea, okay? So then you have to, so now we've described our food, how people are gonna eat it, and how we make it. And then that step 5 there that we have, verify your process flow diagram, basically what you have to do is you have to say, okay, somebody else who is not the person who wrote down the process flow diagram has to verify that you're doing what you said you did, okay? All right, so then the next step is what we call a hazard analysis. So we take all those steps of the process flow diagram and we write down what can go wrong with physical hazards, chemical hazards, or microbial hazards at every single solitary step. FDA folks have to do that with ingredients too, okay? Sounds complicated, it's really, you know, if you do this step right, the rest of this actually is fairly easy. All right, and then we decide what are the critical control points. So where in the process will physical, chemical, or microbial hazards be controlled? So popular critical control point is cooking. We kill a lot of things by cooking. Okay, so, you know, like everybody knows that, you know that, that's why you cook food, right? And then we have to say, well, cooking to what level? Okay, is cooking to 150 degrees okay? Is cooking to 165? Does it have to boil? Who knows? All right, and so we set critical limits. Now those arrows that you see are because in the small food world, we have to do what's called validate those critical limits. So we have to have somebody say that those critical limits are okay. This stuff is published, it's out there, all right? But when you're writing food safety plans, you have to begin with that part in mind, all right? Or else you're gonna be spending lots and lots of money on in-plant testing. So then the next thing we say is well, okay, so we're cooking to usually a time and temperature. We know what time and what temperature. And then what are our monitoring procedures? What are we writing down so that we can say we met our critical limits? Then establish corrective actions. Well, what happens when we don't meet our critical limits? What do we do? What do we do with the food? How do we account for that? And then the final couple of steps, verify, all right? Verify comes from the Latin root veritas, which means truth. Are we telling the truth? Well, the only way you can tell if you're telling the truth in your food safety system is that if you wrote things down. You go and you check your logs. You watch people. You look at your thermometers and see if they're calibrated, okay? That's verification. Validation, like I said, is the scientific justification behind what you're doing. And then finally, the last step is establish record keeping. And when I'm teaching how to do this, I actually teach record keeping first because all of these things that we just went through, steps 1 through 11, you have to write down what you did at those steps. So I teach establish record keeping first. And so this allows us to really understand and draw out our process of what do we make, how do we make it, and how do people eat it, okay? But the truth is that this HACCP plan rests on education and training and the creation of something called prerequisite programs, which are the programs that create the conditions to make safe food. You can do all of the stuff and make your food, you know, you receive your food and you store your food and you process it, but if you do it in a dirty environment, you can't make safe food, okay? So, and anybody who's worked in a restaurant knows this, right? And so when we're doing this, we say that this hazards-based planning rests on a base of education and training and prerequisite programs. But then it exists in this milieu of management committing time, talent, and treasure to what we're doing. Okay, I have been in a number of places where there is no management commitment. Management simply doesn't care. None of the systems work. If management isn't going to care, none of the systems work. All right, part of management caring is creating a system of continuous process improvement. What are we doing well? How do we keep doing it? What are we doing poorly? How do we improve it? That's continuous process improvement. We all do it, or we all should do it in our lives, right? It's no different in food manufacturing. And then the next thing that I really emphasize is usable documentation. Okay, writing things in 6-point font so you fit them all on one piece of paper is an excellent exercise in learning how to format. It does not give you usable data that you can turn into information that you can then turn into actionable knowledge. All right, it's not possible. Nobody can read 6-point font day after day after day and get any meaningful information out of it if something is a little bit off, right? And then finally, what this looks into is internal and external auditing. Are you checking up on yourself? Is somebody else checking up on you? All right. And this is, when I talk about the Global Food Safety Initiative, this is what GFSI is all about. It's all about asking, does the management commit? Is there continuous process improvement? What does the documentation look like? And is it being used correctly? And there are external people who ask that question, and there are internal people who ask that question. Okay? All right, so then this is what it all comes down to, is that they have to know what they make and how they make it. So this is what I do with people, is I get them an Excel spreadsheet and I make them fill this out. All right, this is truly it's like a vaguely formatted copy and paste from an Excel spreadsheet. What's your product brand name? All right, there are, actually in meat and poultry, if you call things certain things, they have standards of identity. This is very common in Europe. If you call something champagne, it better be from Champagne. Okay, you can't make Roquefort in anywhere but Roquefort. In America, it's not different. We don't really have brand names tied to regions, really, but we do have brand names tied to products. So I don't know if you knew this, but if you put cheddar cheese out into the world, it needs to have gone through a cheddaring process. For something to be called a lager, it needs to be lagered and not made like an ale. All right, and so so your product brand name, if you are backing yourself into a standard of identity, you need to know that. All right, so that's the first thing about what do you make. Next thing, what goes into what do you make? All right, 75% of all recalls or something like that are because of allergens. I have a food allergy, my kids have a food allergy. It's really terrible. And I rely on product labeling to tell me whether or not we're safe, because I get really, really sick if I eat the food I'm allergic to. And so we list out the product ingredients, because this is the first step to knowing what you make, because you got to know what goes into it, right? And then we talk about the packaging, because in the food world, the stuff that touches your product is considered to need to be as safe as your product itself. So that's when we look at product packaging, right? And so all product packaging that touches food needs to be food safe and has to be manufactured to a standard of food safety. Then with my clients, what I do is I ask them to list their suppliers. It's incredibly important that you have good relationships with your suppliers, that you have good contracts with your suppliers, okay? Without those, well, life gets really quite complicated, okay? And I know tons of people with whom they've had really fairly problematic relationships with their suppliers, and I've known more than one business go under because their suppliers were not giving them what they needed. All right, and then after we do all that, we ascertain the risk level, and then we say, okay, well, what kind of food safety planning does this need? Does it need a USDA HACCP plan? Does it need a preventive controls plan? Is this something we're making in conformance to the food code? That kind of sort of all depends, all right? So that's how we describe what we make. So once we kind of have all that down, there are a whole bunch of other things that we have to start thinking about. And these are the things that make the conditions so that food can be manufactured safely. Sanitation. I know this is breaking news, but if you don't clean up after yourself, you can't make safe food, okay? This goes along with the don't eat the poop. This is the way we don't eat the poop, is because we clean up after ourselves, right? We wash our hands when we leave the bathroom and we clean up, right? There are some very regimented ways we do that in food. Hopefully this makes you feel better. There are a whole bunch of other things that we have to do. Allergens, all right? It's really important to keep allergens out of food. Preventative maintenance. Preventative maintenance ensures that your plant doesn't fall into your food. You can't have your facility, your equipment, breaking off into your food. And the way that you make sure that that doesn't happen is through a preventative maintenance program. All right, listed out here are all the other kinds of programs. And what I'd like to give you an appreciation of is the sheer volume of food safety requirements that need to be written down for people to make food to put into the commercial food stream. There are some really hard things to do on this list. Writing out specifications, which is essentially saying, what do I make? When I work with food people, this is the hardest thing that they do. All right, I don't have any other way to say it, but writing down really, really specifically what you make is really difficult for a lot of people because they just want to go and do it and they don't want to spend the time to actually write it all out. But by writing it all out, it mitigates risk because you know what to ask for from your raw material suppliers and what you're going to be delivering to the people to whom you are distributing, right? Understanding all of these different things, don't worry about it. You don't have to understand it. But what I really want you to do is to know all of this stuff exists. And if you're going to go into a food business, you're going to work into a food business, you're going to advise food businesses, they need to have this list of things together so that they can create safe food. So what about education and training? Well, education and training, as you remember, is the bottom of our pyramid. And there are all different sorts of education and training that are out there, but there are some real keys that people need to know in order to be able to make safe food. Okay. They need to understand hazards. So remember when I talked about physical, chemical, and microbial hazards? That's coming up, I promise. They need to understand programs. What are all the different things that create the conditions to make safe food? Well, that was that entire list that I just showed you. So you can back the video up and go take a look at that. All of those programs, people need to understand how to write and implement those programs. The technical work, dude, like, I don't know how to fillet a fish and do it the right way, same way 8 hours ago. I don't know, I can't do that. I can fillet a fish. I can't fillet a fish like a minute for a long time. So there are technical things around what people do that they need to be trained in. Then finally, I urge people who are going into food to understand systems management. You need to know how the component parts of the whole work together. And finally, I ask you to take up the mantle of leadership in the food world, because we need people to be having a conversation about leadership, about understanding where our local and regional food businesses are and what are the conversations they need to be having, and the regulatory conversations and the distribution conversations and the greater conversations about how food impacts our economy in order for our local food systems to grow. So we take all of that, okay, and we put it into this funnel and we do these programs, okay? We have people programs, we have products, and we have process, and we combine it with all that education and training, and we make safe food. And we do it at every step of the way. This is the cold chain as it occurs in food. We start back at the ranch, and we take it through processing all the way through distribution, through retail, and to the end consumer. And we need to have food safety at every step of the way. So when we talk about needing to have food safety, what does that actually mean? Who's in charge of this sort of stuff? Well, from a regulatory standpoint, the FDA and the USDA, your state Department of Agriculture, and your local health department are in charge of it. But at the actual companies, like, what does that mean? Well, in order to be a food safety officer or food safety practitioner, there's no national licensure. It's not like, I'm a veterinarian. I took national boards that qualified me to be a veterinarian that I can then go and get a state license. There's none of that. Okay, it's people who have experience, who get certifications. You get certified in HACCP, you get certified in preventive controls, you get certified in sanitation, all these different things. But those are all third-party, like, market certifications that, I teach them, I believe in them, but they're not government. What I teach is not government regulated. And so none of the private stuff that companies do is government regulated at all, basically, except for these couple of specific classes, and there are really not that many of those either. It's really only fisheries HACCP, intro to HACCP for juice, meat and poultry HACCP, and then the preventative controls class for human food and the preventive controls class for animal food. That's it. What was that, 4? 4 official certifications for all the food in the United States. Let's let that sink in for a minute, okay? So what that really means is everybody has the opportunity to make safe food when they go into the food business, and it's everybody's responsibility. So with that ends our introduction to the language and landscape of food safety. I'm going to get into some more real specific topics after this. Thank you so much for joining us. And I've got some reading in the next slide, and I'm always happy to take your questions. So I will leave you with the reading list. Feel free to email me at michelle@dirigofoodSafety.com. Thanks so much, and have a great day.